Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I am here with Andy this evening. Andy, I'm really hoping that you're excited for tonight's discussion.
Steve, I really am.
And it's a little bit of a somber note because of the fact that this is going to be our final video that celebrates the 85th anniversary of Batman. And along with the Ninja Turtles, man, did we have such a fun year reading some of the best stories in the world of Batman and just talking about Batman, celebrating him in all shapes and forms, so many different references and all of that. But the other somber note is the fact that we're short one colleague. Kemi was supposed to be here tonight, and she unfortunately is ill. But we've officially been, meaning Cami and I, discussing a lot about the channel off camera, and we really feel that thanks to these celebratory videos that we've made this year, I think we've really gotten the channel to a very good place where we could put so many video ideas out there in the open, have a whole bunch of dates scheduled, and if God forbid there was an emergency, we could always sacrifice one body in the room and allow the show to continue on. So that's great to know for 2024. I know that this momentum is going to be carrying on into 2025, and all of you out there watching will find out why soon enough. But we thought, because just in case you guys didn't know, every single time the camera goes off on one video, we always discuss what we want to talk about. So throughout the year, we were really trying to figure out which Batman stories we were going to talk about this year. You know, sometimes it was easy and sometimes it was very tough. We made a lot of sacrifices. I mean, it's still sad to me, Andy, that we are not going to be celebrating the 85th anniversary of Batman and not talking about A Death in the Family, even though it's been referenced so many times. To not talk about it is sort of like a sin.
I did have that thought, but here's the thing. We are celebrating Batman's 85th anniversary. There was no way we were going to do all 85 years of his legacy complete and full justice in one year. But I think that's a great point about notable stories that we didn't get to talk about for people who are not done with Batman. I mean, Lord knows you and I aren't done with Batman in our personal lives. So it's a fair point. It's a fair
Right.
point.
So, you know what? I'm just thinking about it right now, and I did not intend to do this, but I'm just going to say, listen, here's some other great Batman stories. You could check
Yeah.
out A Death in the Family, check out Hush, check out Nightfall. And by Nightfall, I mean Nightfall, Night's Quest, Night's End. Check out No Man's Land. Check out some of the more recent stories like Joker War or The Three Jokers. There's so many great Batman stories out there. And as you said, Andy, it's impossible to cover them all in one year.
Yeah.
But
I'm
we
thinking
felt,
I have my own. You named most of them. I'm thinking Batman R.I.P. I'm thinking in more recent stuff, like you said, like Court of Owls. I'm
oh
thinking,
yeah, Death of the Family, Endgame. You know, a
yeah,
lot of Scott Snyder's run was really, really different and so dark. And I mean, there's even great stuff coming out as we speak. If you haven't checked out the DC All In Initiative, everybody, I got to be honest, I did not anticipate reading the DC comic amount that I am currently reading. And
mhm.
that means the DC All In with the regular universe and the Absolute Universe. I highly recommend, if you want to see something completely different, go check out Absolute Batman by Scott Snyder. I think you will definitely see Batman as if you've never seen him before.
Yeah. I think one more from me, Birth of the Demon, for a different like era Batman than we've really kind of focused on, but an interesting like moment in time for the revitalization of the character, which is we're talking about revitalizations of the character. We got a whole episode of that right now. But I'll end it there. But to underscore what we're saying, which is there's a ton of amazing Batman stories out there. We're going to kick ourselves when we realize an obvious 20 that we didn't name just now, like because we could do that forever. But it's been a very fun year reading some of the stuff that came to the very, 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 very top of mind, but there's so much more that's just as good.
And we started this year going over some of Batman's greatest stories with a Frank Miller story, Batman Year One. We felt that it would be important to start at the beginning. And we thought that the best way to end a celebratory year of Batman is to go into the sort of end of Batman's legacy with Frank Miller yet again and go over what some or possibly many may consider the greatest Batman story of all time. And that, of course, is Batman The Dark Knight Returns by the great Frank Miller and art by Klaus Janson. So, you know, we've gone over a lot of Batman stories, and I will say that it is weird for me to say that I used to love and think that there was nothing like The Dark Knight Returns. As a matter of fact, The Dark Knight Returns was the very first comic book bind up story I ever read. A friend of mine lent it to me and I read it and I loved it. But it's not my favorite really much anymore. And I think that that's just because of the fact that I've gained so much knowledge and have read so many amazing stories, you know, from Batman Year One to The Long Halloween, you name it. There's just so many great ones out there. I think it's important that everybody has their own opinion, everybody has their own frame of mind of what their favorite Batman story is at the end of the day. But there is no doubt in my mind when I say that Batman The Dark Knight Returns is truly one of the greatest Batman stories that we ever got, because it was the game changer. It was the one that truly told the world that comic books are back where they belong, with their origins and their dark roots. And we are officially ditching the camp that we've had to force ourselves to write for the last 3 decades. And we are now going into this brand new decade, and we're going to give the world of comics one hell of a shakeup. And along with Frank Miller, you had people like Alan Moore and Chris Claremont and an up-and-coming Todd McFarlane. Comics were about to truly change for the better.
I will say, you know, kind of like you, Steve, there might have been a time where I would say, like, clear cut, this is the greatest Batman story. I think for me personally, I probably currently, for as much as favorites matter, think that Long Halloween is my favorite. Again, for as much as it matters on any given day, it could be this, it could be Arkham Asylum, it could be Killing Joke. But you know, it goes to show how great Batman stories are, how great different writers take it to it. It could be Year One on any given day. But putting favorites aside, because I find it like not that meaningful, and almost putting greatest aside because I think there's a level of taste to it, just so I can have a hot take here and not just, you know, give your cookie cutter, you know, description of Dark Knight Returns. In as much as it's a hot take to say it, my opinion is that this is, and it's a big statement, so I guess it is, this is the most important comic book ever written.
I
That is,
actually will say, if it was not this, it was probably the Dark Phoenix saga.
yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and that's why we're
Or
talking,
Watchmen.
right, that's why we're talking about Alan Moore, that's why we're talking about Chris Claremont, that's why we're talking about Frank Miller, that's why we're talking about these titans that revitalized the comics industry, not only revitalized it, but made it what we know it as today too. And so I think that's a great, you know, potential pick. Again, in order to have my hot take related to the book, I do think this is something I believe. I do think The Dark Knight Returns is the most important comic book ever written. For that reason of what I'm saying, comics would not look like what they do today. It would not be, you know, something that has become embedded in pop culture through movies and television, through references outside of the source material, through crossover stars from comics who are writers, who are all of these things. It is all owed to this book by Frank Miller. It is a great story. It might not be the greatest story, but it was the shot in the arm and the reminder to people that comics obviously now are an art form worth taking seriously, and that deserve to be taken seriously. And merely because there are images does not make it inherently not just a kid thing, but a bubblegum thing. These are books you can think about that resonate through history and that really, really matter. And we can talk about and get something new out of that. We can talk about how we read it. And I credit that being where we get to be in comics today to Frank Miller, to these other writers we've talked about. But if I had to pick one thing, it's The Dark Knight Returns.
Right. And you're absolutely right. I mean, even though, especially as someone who not only appreciates a good writer, but really does appreciate a good artist, Klaus Jansson's art is definitely unique. It is not, if you're talking about like some of the greatest artwork in comics, his work is not going to come off as like a prominent piece of art. But the thing about his art is because of the uniqueness and the way it's designed, it's part of the reason why this book has stood the test of time. Because when you see that image, like when you see, even if it's not even in the page of the book, when you see this gargantuan, hulking version of Batman, you know exactly what that is referencing. And again, it's a book that has resonated. It is a book that has been taken from time and time again. I mean, going back into some of the things that we discussed, there was a Batman animated series episode that referenced it. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy references it. I mean, I love the fact that there is even a two-part animated film directed by Jay Oliva and, of course, produced by the great Bruce Timm. And it's a beautiful, almost page-for-page rendition of the comic book. And it's animated absolutely beautifully because it's a little bit smoother because it's not the pencil sketching or the inking or something like that, but it still takes on the framework of that original artwork by Klaus Janson.
Yeah, I'll point out at this point too that since I've read this book so many times, I use this as the opportunity to read the noir edition of it, which was a really interesting and unique experience. And a reminder, Steve, if you're interested, I actually have 2 copies of it, so you're welcome to the other one.
Oh boy!
But
wow, you're
yeah,
showering me
I
this
have
year.
two. I have two. So, but it's a really, it was a really interesting way to consume it because losing the color, it's interesting. It stripped away some of the grittiness in some ways, because so much of, you think of The Dark Knight Returns and you think of that kind of grimdark, realistic take on Batman, mature, that kind of thing. So much of that comes from the color, but so much of that comes from the line work, obviously. And it still rings true through it. But it was really interesting reading it and experiencing in this way that the tone is completely set by the line work and the dialogue. It was really something. But again, I've read this book a million times, so we can talk.
Yeah, and also, and the other thing that also makes me happy is, as a Funko Pop collector, I do love the fact that there is a Dark Knight Returns line out there, and I actually do have my share of those, as well as the beautiful comic book cover version that glows in the dark, which has the cover of the very first issue. It's absolutely beautiful. But again, that
and
image,
iconic is the word
the
that
shadow
gets
of
thrown
Batman
around.
in the sky and the lightning
Yeah.
bolt, like how many times has that been recreated and even
Yeah.
parodied, you
Yeah.
know?
And and I was thinking about it when you were talking about the look in this, and the way Batman is portrayed. The word iconic is overused and meaningless, but I'm going to use it because this is why that word exists, right? And so that image of Batman against the darkness is iconic and will be referenced until the end of time.
So the story itself, it takes place 10 years after Batman retired. And Gotham, it's not rainbows and unicorns, let's be honest here. It is a very, very dangerous place. Probably the most dangerous it has ever been since Batman had originally come on the scene. There is now an entire legion of gang members, one gigantic gang that has practically taken over Gotham called the Mutants. And especially because of the fact that this book is written in 1986, one of the big questions is, does this book stand the test of time? Oh, you better believe it does. Even though when you take a look at what the mutants look like and they come right out of something that looks like it came from an 80s MTV music video, it's still imagery that is never going to be duplicated, never going to be assimilated. Like, it's exactly what it needed to be, because they were threatening, they were dangerous, because that's the thing. The other very unique thing about this book is also one of the reasons why it makes it so much more relevant today, because that is the power of the media. A large chunk of this book is newscasters and news talk show personas talking about the events that are taking place in Gotham City.
Right. And painting the reality of it, right? And it's truly timeless, because whether we're talking about news television, whether we're talking about radio, whether we're talking now today like social media, there's a commentary here on how reality gets shaped and perceived by these talking heads who have this authority because of the pulpit that they speak from, right? Truly, truly timeless. And starting with that in the story is brilliant.
And at this point in time, while Batman has not been seen for 10 years, another major face in the Batman lore is officially about to ride off into his own proverbial sunset, and that is the fact that Commissioner Jim Gordon is planning to retire. And one of the first things that he does is he actually has a celebratory drink with Bruce Wayne the night that it's officially announced. And that's a very powerful conversation, because I love the fact that he talks about how it was so weird to see you, Bruce, with your mask off, knowing what you were actually doing. And then, of course, he also asks him, how are you spending your retirement? Are you keeping in contact? Like, have you reached out to Dick? And he talks about the fact that it was a rough time when Jason died. So the fact that we're also even getting some of the most well-known things that made Batman who he was also is what makes that scene all the more powerful.
No, I agree. And it's that shared history. And look, it's hard to talk about this book without thinking about year one, right?
Yeah.
Because they're really in conversation with each other.
They're back to back pretty much.
Yeah. And I mean, like, they are, to the extent canon and DC and retcons and all of that, I think it's important to remember in the universe of Frank Miller, year one is 100% happened, and Dark Knight Returns is 100% happened. So whatever you want to talk about the DC universe and individual aspects of it that have been retconned and which Earth it took place on, all of that, I think year one in the Dark Knight Returns we can talk about, like, just kind of together. And so it's a really interesting kind of meeting point, beginning the end point of how we know year one ended, of Jim just being like, put the facade of not recognizing Bruce, and the beginning of that friendship, we'll call it that, at the very least, partnership that lasted years and years and years. And so there's a weight behind that conversation because of their shared history that you couldn't get with someone else, that you couldn't get with Commissioner Gordon just opening up to someone else who was a lieutenant of his. It's different. It's the beginning of both careers.
And so as Bruce takes his walk home, he almost gets jumped by two members of the mutant gang, but he's actually willing to try and see if they can even give him the beating that they think they can, and they don't even want to deal with him because of that. And then he just goes home and he doesn't have an easy night. Alfred, thank God he's still there, because oh man, is he necessary in this story for Bruce. He finds Bruce up in the middle of the night in the Batcave, which hasn't been used in such a long time, and he's just staring at Robin's old costume. And then he says to him, "When did you shave?" Because apparently in the beginning of the book he had a mustache, and he
Mhm.
apparently shaved it somehow, and he didn't even realize it. And then he just turns on the TV and he hears horrible event after horrible event, and then he just is reminded of all the things that have happened that got him to this point, and then all of a sudden he just has an epiphany. He says, Gotham still needs me.
I mean, and it's interesting that it's what I'm left thinking about is that it's Two-Face that kind of brings us back into this new take on old Batman, right? Um, and it's again that return to the beginning thing. Obviously, we get our Joker, and we'll discuss our Joker when we get to it. But there's something about Harvey Dent that's um, more foundational to who Bruce is. Like when we talk about the Long Halloween following year one and kind of that more grounded kind of villainy that Batman can fight, the kind of like detective mafia kind of story. I always see, and I don't know if we talked about it on the channel really, but like I always see Harvey Dent and Two Face as that, this will sound corny, but line between the two almost, because the way that his past is so grounded in the legal system and a way of going about things and then being corrupted, that even though it's fantastical in the way that he is corrupted and he ends up being more of one of those supernatural Batman villain figures, there's something about him where he has, again, I'm sorry it sounds corny, one leg in kind of the reality of it, right? And so having all the stories of what's going on with the mutants and various petty crime take us over the edge. The fact that we start with Two-Face as opposed to Joker.
Yes, yes, because that's one of the few things that we definitely need to get to, because we then take a look a little bit as to what's been going on in the rest of the world that Batman had a connection to. And one of them was what has happened to Arkham Asylum. Arkham
Right.
Asylum is actually not an asylum anymore. It is now
Right.
actually like a mental health clinic, if you will. And then we're introduced to a character who I absolutely despise, and that is Dr. Bartholomew Wolper, because you want to talk about relevancy. This is the man that encapsulates everything that right wing and conservative people can't stand about the sympathetic and the liberals on the other side. That's basically what it looks like these days. But basically, he and a plastic surgeon make both sides of Harvey Dent's face match. They literally put him back to normal. And he has a press conference saying they fixed me. And then all of a sudden, we find out that Harvey Dent has vanished. He's
Mm-hmm.
gone. And at the same time, we do see the Joker. But the funniest thing about the Joker is that he's practically like in a comatose state because there's no Batman. He's not even smiling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what's so interesting.
And it's so powerful in that, we've had the discussion on the channel so many times about the way that Batman and Joker play off each other and what they each mean to each other. And obviously you have things like Christopher Nolan, like you complete me. There's, I mean, some people really lay it on thick like that, and you could argue that it's laid on thick in this book too. There's something sad in a disconnected Joker. I think you agree with me, Steve.
Yeah.
Like it feels like um it's like a Clockwork Orange to me almost, right? It's like it's this villain, but you want them to be whole. And there seems some sort of cruelty in the lack of what seems like a soul in this person almost. Um, and so and again, I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is an incredibly important story, right? Like that level of seriousness being applied to what Batman's existence does to Gotham, even though Gotham needs him because there is petty crime going on, but his existence bringing a sort of crime of a different level back into the, into existence, into play. Um, just the idea of treating that seriously, and making us feel something about it is something this comic did that was really important. Like
Mhm.
really important. That then if there's anything that starts to matter in future Batman stories more, I'm not sure what it is, but it's the way Batman sits amongst the world that he creates and tries to save.
And pretty much Harvey Dent going missing is pretty
Yes.
much the main trigger that caused him to put the cape and cowl back on. I mean, he already knew he had to, but this was basically the one thing because Harvey
Yeah.
Dent was still one of his good and dear friends before he became Two-Face.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see Batman's first time back, and it's so beautifully written because he's basically just trying to find some answers on what happened. He's just like hunting these no goodniks down. And the best part is when you're listening to Batman's inner monologue and and he's talking about how he's in a lot of pain and he's in a lot of discomfort. And also one of my favorite lines in the story is when one of the punks basically says, "This is different. He never made noise like that before." Like that's just such a crazy thing because he's right. Batman
Yeah.
was always quiet and lived in the shadows, but now because of the fact that they hear these loud creaks in this old abandoned apartment building, they feel like he's even more of a threat now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that legacy of Batman that Frank Miller creates here that then lingers in other depictions of the character that honestly lets us have things like we referenced before, absolute Batman, right? The kind of the brute Batman, which is there. He's a skilled fighter, right? But seeing a version of Batman that counterintuitively, due to age, needs to be more of an intimidating presence is really interesting. And I think it's important to just really drive home that this was fresh. That there are so many Batman stories now, and they have written Batman in so many different ways, but this was fresh, people.
And
And
when he,
terrifying and
yeah,
cool to read.
and then when he gets his answers and he encounters Two-Face, it's such a sad thing to see because he basically said, everything that you saw about me, everything that Dr. Wolper said about me, no, I'm not all right, but at least both sides match.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, that's the part about Wolper that I still don't like because he basically, when Batman is officially back out there, he basically gets on to as many television stations as he can, and even has a fight with Lana Lang, who is also a great character to
Yeah.
see in this story,
Mhm.
about how Batman is responsible for all the reasons why the Rogues did what they did and became what they became. And it's Batman that is the agitator when they are, in fact, decent people. And meanwhile, he keeps saying that Batman is a criminal and he really needs to be locked up. And meanwhile, Lana Lang is constantly saying he's not a criminal. He is doing what everybody knows has to be done, and nobody has the guts to do it, which is stand up to violence, stand up to evil, stand up to crime.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
amazing to really see. And I know I said this earlier before we were recording, but there's politics involved in all of this. There's a
Oh, of
real
course.
political discussion
Of
throughout
course.
this story.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I am
Like who
always
is right
one
and who is
to,
wrong.
yeah, I'm always one to go to bat for the idea that a story does not need to be moralizing in order to be good. This is a complex work. I would love to write a dissertation on fascism and Batman. It would be fascinating. But like I think that I think that you're exactly right. And we go back to, we started by talking about the power of the media. And that's something that's really present in here. And it's something that, again, elevates this work into something that can really be talked about and really showed people that this is not a medium of pow, zap, zang, campy 60s Batman, that you can do art in comic books and you can do art with superheroes in the superhero genre and have it take itself super seriously and be actually meaningful in doing so. And I think that it's the gray, it's the amorality of what we're discussing and the complexity of what we're discussing that makes it so great. That it's there's a lot to be said. I meant it, and that I think would be fascinating to write a dissertation on this topic.
Yeah. So after the whole event with Harvey, we see the mutants really starting to get mad, and we finally get to see the mutant leader, and he basically calls out Commissioner Gordon. He calls out the Batman, and he's like and this guy's a real monster. Like, he has shaved his teeth down into fangs. Like, he literally says, I will feast on their bones, I will drink their blood. And then at the same time, we're introduced to another little glimmer of hope. We saw her at the little bits in the first book, but we see her more prominently into the second book, and that is the character of Carrie Kelly, who ends up deciding, seeing the bat signal, even standing up to mutant gangs with her friend once in a dark alleyway, how she wasn't afraid. She believes that with Batman out there, she feels that she can also be a hero and she can make a difference. So she buys a Robin costume. And she's not just an average kid. Like, she's smart, she's a real tactician. She is an athletic girl as well, and she decides that she wants to be Robin, and her goal is to do her own thing. But at the same time, God, I hope Batman finds me because I want to work with him.
Yeah, and it's like Frank Miller is giving us the Batman hero of a thousand faces here, in that it's Robin, and we've had this discussion on the channel, we've character profile discussing the history of Robin. Robin is an interesting character because Batman, when you think of him at his most serious, is so gritty, so dark. So what is this Bat family? Like, he is the loner. What even is any of this? But at the core of Batman's character, a Robin is necessary. There's a reason why we get more Robins, why some of them graduate, why some of them die. Why is it, it's because Batman needs a Robin. And it's beautiful that in the same way that the presence of Batman kind of creates these villains, it's very important that Batman's return creates a Robin. And I think it's good that Frank Miller understood that, because this could on the surface look like the kind of story where someone who didn't understand the character as well and what made them special might say, well, of course, there's no Robin. It's the opposite of that. The existence of Batman creates a Robin in the exact same way it creates the Joker. And I think this kind of like young and someone who, there's a mythology of Robin already, the fact that you can just buy a Robin costume, right? All of that goes to show how fully realized the idea of Batman warping the world around him is in The Dark Knight Returns. And I think to a lot of people, this is one of the most special characters in the book, too.
Absolutely. And then he has his first encounter with the mutant leader, but much like him being a dark, hulking, brooding figure, we get introduced to the new Batmobile. And boy, is that, oh boy.
And Christopher Nolan licked his lips and said, yes, I'll take that.
One of the most iconic another one of the most iconic moments and the most iconic images is the gargantuan tank staring down on the hill in the black shadow, and the mutant leader is just right in front of it saying, come on out and fight me.
Yep.
You cower behind gears and guns. Don't you have the stomach for it? And then Batman just comes out, even though Alfred is saying, sir, if he does it, he'll kill you. He's like, let me see if that's possible.
Yeah, it's, again, reusing a phrase, iconic gets overused, but the reason I say it here is it's finally deserved. right And it's this sort of like primal thing, in that we have like a sort of brutish version of Batman here, but it's in the leader of the mutants, you get really an opposite of what we've known Batman to be, in a different way than the Joker foils him, but one where this is I mean, he barely speaks in complete sentences, let alone English, right? And he's all about the following that's created from chaos and brute strength. None of this is Batman, but Batman will find a way to beat that on its own terms. And he always does,
Yep.
even if it doesn't go smoothly at first.
And boy, does it not go smoothly at first.
Yeah.
Thank God there is Robin to help him and save him. And even though Alfred is basically saying, now run home, little girl, this is not your place, Batman says, not to the hospital, to the Batcave, and Robin comes with us.
Yep.
So she's here
Yep.
to stay. And that's a
Yep.
that's a very heartwarming moment. And he only is doing it because she saved her life, his life.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's exactly what I said. The existence of Batman creates that Robin, and nobody seems to understand that better than Bruce. And it happens so quickly and so comfortably in this story because this ain't his first Robin. But you almost get that sense that as he steps back into the mantle and puts on the cowl, he's like, "If you wear it, she will come." Right?
Yep.
Right?
And,
Yeah.
and as his next plan to take down the mutant leader, even though he's already arrested along with a bunch of other mutants and thrown in jail, he has a bigger plan because he believes that the way to really defeat the mutant gang is to show the mutants how weak their leader really is. Because, like you said, the guy can't even speak straight. So it's like there's a lot more to being a leader than just strength. And while that's happening, there's two other events that are taking place. One of them is the fact that the new commissioner has officially been announced, and it's going to be Captain Ellen Yendel of the Gotham PD, who is a real hard ass. She has plenty of experience, and she is ready to take on the job of commissioner when Gordon is officially gone. But the first course of action is basically putting a warrant out for the arrest of Batman because she is not someone who believes that Batman should be running around on the streets and taking care of crime. The other thing is the fact that because of this debate that's going on all over the news, a certain someone actually sees it taking place and he starts to smile again. And that, of course, is the Joker discovering that Batman is back. And it's done in such a beautiful way. The fact that he hears the name Batman, Batman, and he turns around and he starts mumbling bees. And then he goes, darling. And you see this gigantic smile on his face. It's scary.
Yeah.
We're going to go into the Joker in just a bit, but I will say that one thing about this book is that this is one of the scariest versions of the Joker you're ever going to experience. There's so many versions of the Joker, but not many of them are versions of him that scare you. You know, because it's like Mark Hamill's rendition of the Joker. He's a scary guy because you know what he's capable of. But you're always watching that version of the Joker with a gigantic smile on your face because you love how deliciously evil he is and that he knows how deliciously evil he is, that he can have fun with it. But this version of the Joker, it's not all smiles with him. He may be smiling, but he ain't smiling on the inside. There's a much scarier being in this version of the Joker.
No, not at all. I'm gonna hold on saying anything more about the Joker at this moment till we get a little further. Yeah.
And basically, we'll get to that in just a second because Batman works out a plan, and the last act that Commissioner Gordon has under wraps is let's secretly let the mutant leader out, especially after he killed the mayor, which is so scary, and let him find his way out. And while that's happening, Batman and Robin are basically walking around as mutants, basically telling all the mutants to meet at this spot. The mutant leader wants you there. The mutant leader has no idea that Batman and the entire mutant gang are waiting for him, and Batman uses his tactics, his knowledge of combat, showing the mutants you need brawn, but you also need brains to be a truly powerful person and a leader. And he puts the mutant leader down in perfect fashion.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I was saying before about kind of that foiling with Batman, that obviously we have the Joker and we'll talk about the Joker, but in that different way, that when Batman comes back and gets tested in this really physical way, in this, it shows his ability to triumph still. And again, kind of absent his Robin. We had that moment. Yeah.
So there was another little piece of this story that sort of starts to unfold at the very end of book 2, but really gets into it in book 3, because there's another person that is actually listening. All of
Right.
the things that have happened with Batman have gotten so loud, it has reached the White House and the
Right.
president. And we learn that the reason why Batman actually left was because apparently there was a law that was passed outlawing superheroes and that they were dangerous, all except one who apparently decided to bend the knee and become the president or the United States lapdog, Superman.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say, if there is a critique to be leveled at The Dark Knight, which it's not a flawless book, it's just an incredibly important book. It's not a flawless book. I would say it does try to do a little too much, because think about everything we've talked about thus far, while getting through 2 books
We're already
of
over
it.
2 books, yes.
Yeah, just 2 books.
We're halfway through.
Like, there's a lot of plot threads to follow here in what is, at the end of the day, a pretty short story. Now I'm going to say the next thing. I don't know what I would cut, though. I'm just like,
Well,
because I
there
really
are a
do
couple
genuinely.
of things that I could definitely throw a couple of things your way, because there is that one part of the story that I personally can't seem to understand why it's there, but we can't get to it just yet.
Sure, we'll get in a bit, but this was my moment of, as we bring it, like, I have enjoyed everything we have discussed so far, so I've not found something that like jumps to mind as like, yes, this is the easy fit. Cut this, let the rest of it breathe. Keep it dense though, and it's fine. But this is one of those moments where I kind of feel the need to point out, someone might say that this is too unnecessary complex a web of storylines when you add in the layer of the outlawing of the superheroes, the idea that superheroes were dangerous, that Superman, like, gets around this by agreeing to kind of be beholden to the United States. Um, I give it a pass, because we're still doing the whole Batman does kind of create the villainy around him in a way. So we do get the depth of there being at least a layer of truth to it, even if there is something scary in the centralization of power behind Superman. But it's one of those things where it's like, I can't talk about it as in depth. But I just acknowledge that if there was somewhere where someone was going to sit me down and say, "Hey, Andy, here's why this isn't one of the greatest Batman stories of all time," like, to steel man that idea, they'd probably say that there's way too much going on in it.
So Batman is still doing his thing. He's now officially trying to break up all the splinter gangs that come out of the mutants. We see a character named Bruno, who is definitely one of the most standout parts of this story, because she's got swastikas on her breasts, which is kind of weird. But throughout that big fight between him and Bruno, we actually see Superman come in, because Superman did tell the president that if anything, I'll just talk to the guy.
Mhm.
And he basically just says to him, "We're not talking right now. I understand you want to talk, but not right now."
Mhm.
And that's basically where we have another one of those really iconic images where you see like Clark just standing outside and there's like an eagle perched on his arm.
Mhm.
That's kind of crazy. And they
Yeah.
have that whole conversation about what happened to all the other heroes. But the real focus right here is the fact that Bartholomew Wolper basically now has taken on the Joker as one of his prime patients, and he wants to show the world that the Joker is an okay guy. He's misunderstood. And I'm going to put him on the most popular late night talk show in Gotham. I'm going to put him on the David Endicott show.
And
And yeah,
as we have seen throughout Batman media and adaptations, putting the Joker on a late night talk show probably doesn't end well.
no, because the best line in that whole scene is so many people, so few smiles. And he
So good.
basically,
It's
but again, this was the part that still makes me happy because Bartholomew Wolper really gets his comeuppance in this moment because it's far too late when he finally because he's never going to realize because he's dead. Oh dear God, what was I thinking? Like he literally thought that he could tame the Joker?
Mhm.
Jesus, man. No
Yeah.
way.
Well, could tame the Joker without Batman. It's interesting. And God, I love this scene. And and what a way to jolt the Joker back into the spotlight. You talk about how Joker kind of overhears Batman being discussed on the TV. Batman will be aware of this. That's kind of the idea, to come in with a bang. Not a bang zap bop 60s, but a bang in the sense of an unmistakable act,
Yeah,
that'll
and
get the spotlight back on the two of them.
yeah, and then we get one of the scenes that I'm still trying to figure out what the point was, and that was the scene with Selena Kyle. Like
Mhm.
it's great to always see, and I'm purposely wanting to focus on this because there were too many times this year where we discussed Batman lore and completely forgot about Catwoman.
That did
But
happen. Yeah, yeah.
but she felt a little out of place for me. I mean, I could
Mhm.
understand that it was there for another attention grab for the Joker to get to
Yes.
Batman, but you would think the whole fiasco on the David Endicott show would have been enough.
Yes. Yes. But it's kind of the personal too. Again, if I were to steelman the opposite side of my take on Dark Knight Returns, I would just simply say, yeah, it's too busy. But I do think there's a level of Bruce's connection to Selena that comes through in a way different from public fear that gets caused from the destruction at the TV show, which of course, while it's bad and Bruce will respond to that, um, it's I mean, how different is it really from wanton violence from the mutants? You know, like it's different in a different kind of way in the motivation, and where it comes from. That the Joker is not the mutants; he's a very different individual threat. So
Oh boy.
you could say that, yeah.
And then we have the final showdown between Batman and the Joker. And this really is the
The
final
final
showdown
showdown.
in the most appropriate place of all appropriate places, in the tunnel of love in an amusement park, in a carnival. I mean, oh my God, because that's what it is, the whole you complete me thing.
You
And it's
complete
like,
me.
this is where the Joker has literally been beaten and bloody. He's got a batarang in his eye at this point in time, and he is loving every moment of this. Like he literally says to Batman, "This is the part, isn't it? This is the part where we've all been waiting for." And then he just takes out his switchblade and he stabs Batman in the chest a whole bunch of times. It's one of the most dark, one of the most gut wrenching, intense fights between Batman and the Joker that you ever see. And boy, does it end like this is the perfect way to do it because
Yeah.
Batman basically cripples him. But of course, he's not going to kill him.
Right.
And the
Right.
Joker, and now Ellen Yendel and the cops are literally on their way to bust him. And he's basically saying, "You're in trouble now." But he's like, "Just end it. Just kill me, man. Just do it." And
Yeah.
Batman's like, "Shut up." And
Yeah.
so what does Joker do? He kills himself. He breaks
Yeah.
his own neck. And then
Yeah.
that iconic scene again, we say that word again, where Batman basically clutching his bloodied abdomen and he's sitting next to a dead Joker with that
Mhm.
creepy grin on his face. And
Yeah.
that's the ending of book 3.
What an image and what an idea. And I love, and I'm going to it. And again, I'm looking at the noir version right now. So it's the line work. But, you know, just the idea, they'll never know that you didn't have the nerve. I'll see you in hell.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's, and to think that before the Dark Knight Returns, we've had our dark roots of Batman, and we've had the history of the character that in many ways is being come back into play with this story. But like, that sits with you. That sits with you in a way that makes you think I am reading a different comic book right now. And comics were never the same.
Well,
They
that
were
well,
just
that's
never
the
the
thing. It's
same.
like
That
when I
was it.
read this for the first time, the kid in my school who showed me the book, he just said, "Wait till you read the part where Batman fights the Joker." Says, "You are going to be forever changed." That's what he
Yep.
actually said. He says, "You will never look at Batman the same way again." And boy,
Yep.
like I still remember before I gave that book back to him, how I looked at that last image of the two of them sitting there side by side, and just how oh my it's an image that just sits in your brain. You
Yeah.
can't get and you can never get it out.
Yeah. I was too young when I read this book.
Yeah,
And the
I was
first time
14.
I was too young when I read this book the first time. So I don't have it's interesting. I don't have a strong memory of that and that first time reading it, but it just kind of feels like this is part of my comic ego. Like this just is me. Like this when I think of Batman, like all of these things come flooding back. Um that's one of those scenes. That's just one of those things that fundamentally is Batman when I think about it and where it goes. And it's so interesting because so much of the Batman story and mythos is not killing the Joker. And obviously he doesn't. And that's the whole point in that scene. But that's it. This is an oversimplification. There is a finality to death. Um, but with a character with a character like the Joker that we have this history with, that even at the time this was written, despite the fact the comics were different, these are still characters that are deeply embedded in pop culture, even in different ways. There's something about this moment where you understand that you have seen, and granted, stories will continue to be written, but you've seen their whole relationship. And there's just something really gripping to me in the idea that we now look back on the Batman Joker relationship and there is nothing more to be created by it. We've seen the first and last chapter. And it weighs with me differently than other stories that involve a death. Partially because this is set in such an ambiguous future, it kind of makes it feel, even though other Earths and retconning and all of that, obviously this is not the only Batman. This is not our main line Batman, eventually all that decide, right? But like, it gives me that sense still reading this, that this is how it ends with Batman and Joker, though, in one way, shape, or form. Frank Miller wrote an amazing story to draw that out, and to really, really kick something special off in bringing it back to that. And I think when people write Batman, they will forever need to kind of think about the Batman Joker relationship, at least with this scene in mind. Even if it has nothing to do with their own canon, even if it has nothing to do with the story they're telling, just something about the masterful nature that it was summed up here. It's just always going to resonate.
And
Always.
so, escaping from the cops, getting rescued by Robin by the seat of his pants, he's now officially back at the manor. But at this point in time, he's trying to figure out his next move. Because one of the few things that he's definitely noticing is that one of the splinter gangs that is emerging is the Sons of Batman, who are basically using extreme vigilantism in his name with guns, which is something that he truly does not believe in. And he definitely knows that these guys need to be put in their place and they need to know how to do things the right way. Because it's okay to be heroes, but you got to be heroes that people appreciate and respect. And then comes the other part of the story that I think gets a little too big for its britches. And it's that whole thing that takes place in Corto Maltese with the Russians.
Hmm. Hmm.
The part where Superman is basically out there, he prevents the Earth from being blown up by a nuclear warhead. And what it basically does is it creates a global EMP, which knocks power out. And the most dangerous thing is the fact that it knocks power out to Gotham City. And that's when things start getting really out of hand. And this is where Batman says, here's my opportunity. And he starts rounding up people on horseback. That is probably one of the greatest images in the book, Batman
Yeah.
riding a horse
Yeah.
and basically telling everybody, if we're going to, he says, I am the law. We're going to keep Gotham under control. We're not going to make Gotham safe, but we have to do things my way, and I'll show you how it's done. So the question that I have here is, do we really need that whole Corto Maltese thing to lead to this actual moment? Like, what was the, I personally do not know what the significance of that whole ordeal with the Russians was.
Well, I would say it mostly lies in the outcome, which you just started going into, which is we needed a reason for Batman to be an anachronistic source of justice. So, with the lens of the 80s Soviet scare kind of threat of nuclear war of the time, how are we going to blast ourselves into a, if not stony ages, medieval age of safety and security? For, again, I said it before, I'd love to write a dissertation on the fascism of Batman, but in order to get us to that point of like Batman's law, right, what would we do? So it's a very 80s thing, honestly, straight up.
Yeah, and
Um,
yeah, and out of nowhere, this is probably one of the more interesting pieces. The fact that this is all taking place has another big name come out of the woodwork,
right,
and it's Oliver Queen, the
right,
Green Arrow,
right.
basically
Oh, it's
telling
interesting
him,
just in terms of our ultimate journey. I feel like I am like more aware of Green Arrow in the last year than I have been at any other point of time reading comics. And it's weird because we're not doing an ultimate journey specifically about him, but doesn't he always seem to turn up at like the times where you most need
he's
somebody to do
always
something
there. He's
important?
always there when you need the true voice of reason and
Yeah.
rationale. That's what he's there for. He is the guy that is always down to earth, fighting for the little guy. No, he's the one with the bleeding heart. That's what he
Mhm.
is. That's
Mhm.
who Oliver Queen is. But in this case, he doesn't really have much of a bleeding heart because he basically says that it was my bleeding heart that got me to where I am. And in this case, he has one arm.
Mhm.
And he basically just says, Bruce, if you're gonna do this, all I want is a crack at Big Blue. He just wants a crack at the Boy Scout because Superman coming back from Corto Maltese basically now sees what's going on in Gotham. And obviously, this is the violation of everything that was instituted. And it's now, unfortunately, his task to officially put Batman down and put him in his place. So he basically just writes the big word in the ash, where, and Batman says Crime Alley, and that's when he starts putting his plan together. He has a plan. Carrie knows his plan. Alfred knows his plan. Oliver knows his plan. We just have to get it right, and we have to get it done before the clock runs out. And then we get this big. th- Let me ask you this. Do you or do you not know this? Is this the very first time in comic books where Batman actually fought Superman?
So I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm inclined to say I doubt it, but at the same time, it's also like when in comic, at the very least, when in comic books would it have been done seriously before
Yeah.
this? That's how I would phrase it. Um, I would, if I were a betting man, since I do not have an encyclopedic knowledge of comics, I would say no. But I would also wager a guess that it was much campier, or there was much more mind control, or, or there was much more, alternate world or dream sequence or silly fan servicey kind of thing. Like Steel Manning opposition. This is silly and fan servicey. Drawing that back because I really like it. It's being done very seriously and with
It's
reason. And this is where
so
we're, yeah,
so maybe this is the very first time that a fight between Superman and Batman actually had a purpose and a meaning.
serious. When it seriously happened, really, and their hearts were in the fight in a way.
Yeah,
That
and
I
that's
would
and that's
wager a
it.
guess at, and someone who knows more about comics than me can shit all us in the comments.
And that's what's really interesting. You mentioned a very important word, and that's the truth. Their hearts are in it, and that's the
Yes,
thing. Superman's heart is all in this because he knows he has to do this, but he really doesn't want to, and
right.
he is literally begging for Bruce to stop. He's
Yeah,
saying, "Please don't do this. I don't want to do this,"
yeah,
but
yeah.
he'll do it.
And yet he will, and that's the thing that makes it a serious fight. um and of course Batman, with his preparedness, will leverage any chink in the armor that he can, to get at Superman and to win this fight, because Batman's heart is also in it from a place of he wants to do this. This is the outcome he needs, so he will see it through.
Mm-hmm. And of course, it's amazing to see how everything really did fall into place. Ollie came in exactly when he needed to with the kryptonite arrow to truly cripple Superman. But at the same time, even before that, Batman pretty much knew all the ways to prevent Superman from really leveling him. And then, of course, you get that amazing image of Batman kicking Superman square in the face with his spiked boots because he's wearing this big set of armor. And then you get the line, "I
Mhm.
want you to remember, Clark, in all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember my hand at your throat. I want you to remember the man who beat you." And then his plan officially comes into play, and Batman's heart stops.
Mhm. Mhm.
Even though Superman actually knew that there was something wrong with him. And in that moment, everything else gets executed. Bruce Wayne's mansion blows up. Alfred triggers the bomb. Carrie Kelly is far away from that side. She's basically got another plan in play. And then unfortunately, Alfred passes away from a stroke, which is probably, you know, it's it was probably the the best way for Alfred to go. Just like knowing
Yeah.
that he basically sees Wayne Manor engulfed in flames, and he basically is saying in his mind, "My work here is done," and then it's time for him to go. There's
Mhm.
nothing left for him now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good, and it's an ending. And I think and we'll talk about the rest of it now because we're here. Um I think it is a satisfying ending. Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on the end of the book?
I mean, maybe a little bit of dissatisfaction because I kind of felt that, just as a fan, I wanted more of the fight. I just felt that there was so much more to get. But then,
But I mean, you said it yourself, the remember the one who beat you. Like, how much more final can we get than that? I feel like we saw the whole fight
well, the one thing
personally.
that I mean, like,
Personally.
for just like one last punch and then just see the shadow of Bruce just like engulfing Superman while he's just lying there motionless on the floor. But, at the end, it was part of Bruce's plan because at the funeral, Suit Clark is there in disguise. He hears Batman's heart. He sees that Carrie is there and that, it's her job to make sure that he's there when she wakes up. And then we see the next stage of Batman's life, and Superman's actually playing along. He lets Bruce Wayne vanish into obscurity, but his legacy is about to live on. He's creating a whole new base of operations with a whole group of people behind him.
Mhm.
So the whole thing of the days of Bruce Wayne and Batman being a loner are now officially gone because Carrie is there. The Sons of Batman are there. Even old members of the mutant gang are there. Ollie is there. It's a whole new world, and Batman is basically about to create an entire army of Batmen and women to carry on his legacy and keep Gotham safe.
Yeah. So it's the most important comic book ever written.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like, I will say what's really satisfying is the last line of the book, and it's basically, this will be a good life, good enough. You know, that's good to know.
Yeah. Because what more could be said, right? After wrapping up all of the plot lines that we have, what more is there for Batman? This certainly feels it. This feels like as complete an ending as you can get after wrapping up the Joker and Clark. Like, if you tie up these loose ends to who Batman is and how he is tied to the world, what is there? There's this. There's a legacy. Yeah. It's, you think of it in conversation with year one, and where we started and the street level and the making a difference and then where things end up. But I think of this book, I think of it in conversation with every work in Batman history since then. I think of Batman Beyond. I think of the original animated series. I think of all film versions of Batman, every single one.
I mean, look, say what people want about Batman v Superman. I mean, that whole story, especially those last couple of minutes, that is very much based around the Dark Knight Returns.
Basically this,
he's basically wearing the same uniform, the same armor suit.
Yeah, whatever you do with it, it's this, and this one will resonate through with Batman in Batman stories forever. Yeah, it's the most important comic book ever written. It might not be my favorite Batman story, but it's certainly a great one.
No, I mean, you know what? You know something? I think that it could be rightfully said, if you want anyone to read any one Batman comic in their entire lives, like if they never pick up another Batman comic ever again, it should be this one. There's no other way. There's no other way to say it. It's one of those
ones, if people say it, it's like, how could I ever really argue against it? Like, thinking that's a bad choice.
Because I could probably tell you 10 people are approached by 10 individual Batman fans. Each one of them goes to one person and recommends them a Batman story. 9 of them recommend The Dark Knight Returns, and 1 recommends The Long Halloween. The person who recommends The Long Halloween, the other 9 Batman fans are going to say, you didn't recommend The Dark Knight Returns?
No, they're going to say, Long Halloween. Yeah, that's good too. That's good. That's good.
But it's not The Dark Knight Returns. For the one Batman story you want the average comic book reader to read.
It's this one. It's this one. This is the one. Whether it's the greatest or not, completely immaterial, it is the most important one. And
it couldn't be more relevant today. It really is still very much. It really stands the test of time.
It does. And this is a fantastic way for us to end our 85th anniversary celebration of Batman.
Absolutely.
There really isn't a better book we could have done this with.
We are unfortunately 2 years early, but it is kind of crazy to believe that in 2026, this book is going to be 40 years old.
Yeah. Oh,
that is kind of crazy.
So weird to me.
So is Batman Year One. That's also going to be 40 years old.
No, I'm just thinking by the time I recommend it to James, it'll be at least 50 years old. And that is really fucking with me right now.
Anyway, I think that is the perfect place to end this conversation. Andy, it was such a pleasure talking Batman with you.
Always.
One more time
the whole year.
In 2024.
The whole year.
Maybe if this channel is still around, in about 5 years, maybe we'll do something for the 90th. I don't know. Because, like as we said at the beginning, there's still so many other Batman stories that we didn't cover, and so many different Batman topics we haven't covered. And that's just the beauty of this character. There's so many things to talk about. And with a 90th anniversary 5 years away, there's only going to be more new exciting stuff about Batman to talk about. So everybody, thank you so much for watching. Leave a comment. Let's discuss. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content, because there's going to be a lot of content in 2025, everybody. I mean, this was a good year. I wasn't sure at the very beginning of this year, but looking back on the last 12 months, this was a damn good year for us over here on That's Comical, and it's only going to get better from here, everybody. So we'll see you all in the next one, and have a wonderful and safe holiday season.
Happy 85th, everybody.